So yeah, today we're going to be talking about making genetically representative seed collections from native woodland. So through the talk, I'm going to try and bring in some of my learning that I took from working at Kew Gardens Millennium Seed Bank over the years and try and apply that to, or as best as I think, to like the community tree nursery situation. So I'll be introducing some of the guides that are already out there that can really help you think about how to make good collections, and then introducing some key topics like sampling from naturally occurring populations and some decisions that we can make in the field about maximizing the genetic diversity in our collections. So yeah, I've kind of put this genetically representative in brackets because it's a massive topic, isn't it? And actually, I think like today, it's just good to talk just in general about like the framework of seed collecting, and then touch on how we should consider genetic diversity. But I don't know, there's probably different levels of experience in the room, so I think good to just think about seed collecting in general and the key principles. And then yeah, I'm actually not from Kew Gardens anymore, but lots of the knowledge that I'm going to use here will be from Kew. I'm actually at Leeds University doing a PhD in looking at woodland creation and how we can evaluate woodland creation projects. And currently actually on placement with Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, helping out with some mapping. So just to read the room in like, has anyone, put your hand up if you've actually collected seed, not from just like the garden. Well, maybe the garden. Keep the garden up. Keep the garden up. Yeah. Okay, so everyone's collected some seed pretty much. What about keep it up if you've collected from trees? Okay. Yeah, I feared everyone would know a lot already, but here we go. But no, hopefully there's something in here for everyone, whether you're new to it or actually you're trying to think more about like what you actually are collecting. So as said, I've been asked today to talk because I used to work at Kew's Millennium Seed Bank for 8 years. It's the largest wild species seed bank in the world. It was anyway 3 years ago when I left. So I'm a little bit rusty on some of this stuff because I've not talked about it for a while. But I actually worked as fieldwork officer for the UK National Tree Seed Project, which was a project that aimed to create a national ex situ collection of seeds from UK native trees and shrubs and maximising the amount of genetic diversity captured for each species. So following on from Paul's prompt earlier, we've got the provenance map, the seed zone map from Forestry Commission. So what we did on the project, we tried to make a collection of native species in every seed zone in which it naturally occurs. So for some species, that might be the whole of the UK. For other species with a slightly more restricted distribution, it might be just a few seed zones. And actually, the project was really successful, collecting from seed from almost 11,000 trees across 76 species. And I tried to find an action shot yesterday of me collecting from trees and realised I didn't take that many pictures. So this is me. There's not a tree in sight, but Carol's going to be very happy because it was collecting creeping willow in Ashdown Forest in the High Weald in Sussex. So yeah, trees and shrubs. But same rules apply to that as the big trees, like the limes. So what this talk will and won't cover, as said, I'm trying to, I'm from a seed banking background, and sometimes the kind of what the ultimate aim might be a little bit different to like collecting seed to grow and put back in the landscape. But actually, I'm going to try and use some of that and bring in other resources more connected to community tree nurseries and see if we can like pick out some key principles. So there's loads of good guides out there already. This is what people are referring to, isn't it? This wasn't around when I was doing it. The tree growers guide. This is amazing manual that I had a look at the other day from Woodland Trust, Silver Foundation and others. And then also from the Tree Council, there's a really useful guide. And even on the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust website, there's loads of good resources there. So we'll have a look at some of those during the talk. And then, this is the project manual, the collecting guide for the tree seed projects that we worked on. That's really good for thinking from trying to find a woodland all the way through to biosecurity, how to look after your collections after, again, with a kind of aim of seed banking rather than growing, but still really useful. And if you're really keen and you want to go a bit deeper into different collecting techniques and maybe germination and storage of different tree species, then the Millennium Seed Bank's technical information sheets are really, really useful. So there's many reasons why we might collect seed, agricultural reasons. We might want to collect seeds because they've got specific traits that we want to grow, bigger corns on the cob, etc. That's been going on for millennia. Conservation reasons, we might want to collect seeds and collect seeds from a protected species or a threatened species and try and build up a seed store. Or we might do it for research because we're trying to find like an important trait within that confers some kind of resilience to pests and disease or drought tolerance. But the one that I think we're all most interested in is collecting seed for restoration purposes. So collecting seed to grow, put back in the landscape. That's what we're all here together today to talk about. And I think we've already said how important community tree nurseries are in filling some of the gaps in seed supply, and especially providing like locally appropriate trees for our kind of local environment or the region that we exist in. And this is a bit of a, almost feel like this is a bit clickbaity, isn't it? 3 things to consider when making seed collections. There's like loads of things, but I've tried to narrow it down what I feel are the most important things to consider. So target native species, probably a bit of debate over that already going on in the room. Target naturally occurring populations, so woodlands, but we'll come back to the term populations. And then take steps to maximize the genetic diversity within your collections. And the good thing is, I think these principles are mentioned for seed banking and for community tree nurseries. So targeting native species, this is kind of, I don't know, I'm going to consider it the easiest one, the easiest principle to follow. We often know what species are native or considered native or non-native. The kind of definition that we all adhere to is that they're native if they establish naturally after the last ice age. But then there's some talk, some trees, or let's think of it like unaided by human transference. But again, there's some debate over that. But let's just call it that. Look on a website. Is it native? Yes, no. But yeah, maybe you want to think about things more deeply than that. But just beware as well. Some species have restricted native range. So Scots pine, considered native in just a certain area of Scotland, and beech is technically native only in like the southern part of England. Naturally occurring versus planted woodlands. So the second one is a little bit more tricky to factor in to your seed collecting. But what we mean by, we're interested in naturally occurring woodlands and naturally occurring trees within those woodlands is because these will have grown up over generations and will be more adapted to their local environment, and we kind of term this local provenance, and it links back to the seed zone map we saw earlier. Whereas planted woodlands, so they might be planted, we just don't know, we don't know the origin of a planted woodland. It could be from local stock, it could be from halfway across the world, could be have a very narrow genetic kind of variation within the planted stock. So that's why we kind of say like prioritize, try and find naturally occurring woodlands, and we'll get onto how you might do that a bit later on. And then capturing genetic diversity. I probably should have said actually, yes, so local provenance is important as well because these trees are more likely to be adapted to like things that they face in the environment. So we've touched on that a bit, like the kind of wetness, the windiness, etc. So they're more likely to survive. So capturing genetic diversity within your collection and why genetic diversity matters. So when we're talking about adaptations and traits, really we're talking about the underlying genetic diversity. And at its simplest, it's the variation between individuals within a species. And then this genetic variation, which allows trees to adapt and survive, varies within and between populations. So think of a population as like a distinct woodland. And a more technical definition is a population is a group of trees of the same species living and reproducing together in a particular area over time. So yeah, like an individual woodland separated by some barrier or temporary barrier to kind of pollination. And this little diagram's a bit of an extreme version of that, but it helps like get across the idea of what a population is. So these would be two separate populations separated by a mountain. But yeah, it's not always as extreme as that. But let's just think of population as two separate woodlands that are not kind of joined together. And so when we're making seed collections, we're trying to maximize, so these populations might have different underlying genetic diversity, and we're trying to capture that in our collections. But we're also trying to capture the genetic diversity and variation within each woodland. And that's because some of these trees, yeah, as said, might be more kind of resilient to future threats. And when we're thinking about restoration and planting back out into the environment, it's very important that we give, the best chance that some of those adaptations are in the planted trees. And that means that like hopefully some will survive, I guess, if there is something bad in the future. So how can we put this into practice? Like how can we collect from naturally occurring woodlands and also maximize genetic diversity? It's not an easy thing to do, and we're often working with imperfect knowledge. So we can't, unless we go with some like DNA probe or whatever, maybe that's not far away, and look at all these trees and do that and kind of see inside them and look at the DNA and the different genes and alleles and adaptations in each tree. We actually have to make assumptions about the way genetic diversity is normally distributed in individual woodlands and between woodlands and actually on a national scale or an international scale. But yeah, we're going to focus just on that kind of the diversity within the woodland and maybe between the woodlands. So instead of kind of, because we lack that information, we use a set of working assumptions about genetic diversity to create like a sampling strategy or maybe like a decision tree of like how many trees we might want to sample, how many woodlands, etc. And that's really what a lot of the work at Kew was about, and there's loads of scientific literature about that type of stuff if you're interested. But the rest of the talk, I'm just going to try and pull out from that some practical decisions that you can take to make sure that you're collecting from native, naturally occurring populations, and you're considering, at least considering and thinking about, have you collected from enough trees? How genetically diverse is your seed collection? So where should you collect seed to start with? So where possible, it's probably going to bring some groans from the room maybe, where possible, at Kew it was advised, collect from ancient semi-natural woodland at least 4 hectares in size. Now we all know there's not a lot of ancient woodland of that size around. Carol pointed out, what if you go there and there's a big whopping tree that needs tree climbers? It's not as easy as just saying, let's do that. But let's start, that's our first port of call. And you can do that by, you can find, probably all well versed on this, using things like Magic Map and Ancient Woodland Inventory, and looking to see if there's any suitable habitat nearby. And then you could use things like BSBI and other botanical record databases to overlay as best as you can that data with your suitable habitat. And the reason that we're saying ancient woodland is because in records, many of you know that ancient woodland is an area of land that's been wooded since at least 1600. So it gives us a good idea that those trees are naturally occurring, but there might be planted trees within there. It may also be that that ancient woodland was clear felled many years ago and replanted by monks with European stock. But again, it's that framework to try and think about and give ourselves the best chance of finding naturally occurring populations that are adapted to the local environment. But this is the bit I'm really scared about saying on camera. Alternate sites, because in reality, like, we might not always be able to find that. Some of our species might not be in woodlands, they might be hanging onto a cliff edge. So put the principles in place. You know, how certain are you that this was not planted? Is it some sites, maybe you've got site maps dating 200 years ago and it looks like it's been wooded for that entire time. You go to the woodland, look for certain management kind of practices like coppicing, ancient coppicing, things like that, that mean the woodland's been around for a long time, and just avoid collecting from loads of trees in a row. Which actually I should have said when that picture came up earlier, that one was an ancient woodland and one was a pine plantation. So that's where you should collect. What about when should you collect? Yeah, big thing in seed collecting. Yeah, collecting at the right time is very important. It's all about timing. So you want to collect mature seeds. This is really important in seed banking. You want to collect seeds at the point, or just at the point of natural dispersal, or just before. So think of natural dispersal, you know, seeds in a pod, they rattle when they're ripe and mature. If you shape an apple tree, the ripe apples fall off. The birch seeds that blow in the wind, they're at the point of natural dispersal. Sometimes you might need to go just a bit before, like hazels, otherwise you'll find that the squirrels have eaten them all. The reason seed banking is really important for mature seeds, because that's when those seeds, when stored, will survive the longest when dried and frozen. But again, I think I still think from reading around, it's important for community tree nurseries, because they will be at their most viable, and maybe you do need to store them from year to year, and they won't be like, they'll be kind of less predated, and yeah, but we'll come back to that. So yeah, and then look around. So, you know, there's amazing resources. This is from the Tree Grows Guide. The YDMT also have these calendars, and look and see what's your window of opportunity for collecting mature seed from these different tree species. But you can't be going to the woodland and walking around it and going and tracking if it's mature. You sometimes don't have the resources to do that, but good idea before seeding, go and have a look. When do you think it's ready? Also, really good if your tree is not going to have leaves on by the time that you come to collect the seeds, because you might pick the wrong tree. Not that you would. No, you wouldn't do that. And then planning and logistics. Let's skip past this because Carol's covered it, but just landowner permission. Do you need extra permissions? What equipment do you need to collect? You know, some trees are small, some are big. We've kind of touched on that. There's different collecting techniques. Again, there's advice online you can have a look at. But try to match your equipment, your collecting technique. This seems like common sense, but like, yeah, putting a tarpaulin down and a rope and kind of knocking all the seeds that are very light that will fly away, you're probably not going to catch much on your tarpaulin. That might be really good for apples, but maybe you need a pole pruner. I don't know. These are the harder things for like community tree nurseries, I recognise, because maybe you don't have all of this equipment, but I don't know whether it's things that could be pulled or I don't, yeah, quite interested to know a bit more about. There we go. So yeah, good things to consider. Biosecurity. I'm glad I got that on there. And again, Something I don't really know much about, really important in the seed bank, is we didn't, as standard, collect seeds from oak and beech and other recalcitrant species, seeds that don't survive drying and storing in a seed bank. But you wouldn't want to do that in a community tree nursery. And I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say that for those species, you can store them for a long time in kind of ambient conditions. Someone nod or different or shout with. To an extent, yeah, short-term storage for restoration. So in the tropics, they have to do that a lot because a lot of their species don't survive drying and freezing. So they have to have kind of these short-term 5 to 10 year seed banks, putting it in like hay and things like that. Luckily, we don't have many of those species. And also willows, so it's great that I'm going to leave that to you guys to work out how to do it, but they're short-lived when they're off the tree. So yeah, you need to just consider that if you're not going to plant immediately. So how will you collect? We touched on this. Have you collected from the right tree? Some of our species are really hard to identify. Don't let that put you off. But maybe for some of the harder to identify willows, go earlier in the season. Look at the catkins, because sometimes like male and female catkins are the way that you can tell the difference between species. Take a specimen. If in doubt, always take photos, but if you really want to look at it and make sure that you've collected the rarer willow species maybe before you reintroduce it, you want to be really certain and maybe have a few people look at it and verify. So yeah, that's good advice. Collect from across the canopy. So we're getting on to kind of genetic diversity considerations here as well. So collect across the canopy. Seeds mature at different times of the year. So they'll have across the season. So they'll have different pollen parents. Don't want to just select really early, really late. So maybe you want to kind of stagger some of your collecting so you're not just biasing towards a specific flowering period. Avoid collecting from the ground, lots of dead, infested seeds, and use suitable collecting techniques. That was about the tarpaulin, etc. Always, again, if you're planting immediately, maybe this is less important, but most of our seeds are quite dry. You can put them in paper or cloth bags and they'll kind of air out naturally, lose a bit of moisture. That will be good for storage. Fleshy fruits like Gelder rose and things like that, collect in a plastic bag, but then clean them when you get back and remove the pulp. Otherwise, they might go mouldy. Those are just practical considerations, really. And label everything clearly. It'd be terrible if you collected all this seed, planted it out, and then it was the wrong tree. But yeah, sometimes we get collections with like no labels on or things like that. So yeah, it's really important. And you touched on it as well earlier with, what if you find some species that are tolerant or something, or like, I don't know, you maybe want to just keep notes of where these seeds came from. And yeah, collect healthy seeds. There's a really good, we call it the cut test, or we used to call it, got to stop saying we. We used to call it the cut test when I worked at Kew. But I make sure that you're collecting healthy seeds that are capable of growing. So it's common for seeds to be infested by like bugs that eat the insides of the seeds, or empty because they've been aborted or something's happened. You could easily just collect all of those without looking at them. And again, you've got like no good seeds to grow trees and you've wasted your time and money. But don't be put off because some species do just have high numbers of like juniper, lime. They just have high number of low quality seeds. So really here, just cut it open, 10 to 20 seeds per tree, have a look, what kind of proportion of seeds are not going to make trees, are kind of non-viable. And then however many trees you want to however many seeds you kind of want to collect for your nursery, like factor that in. If there's a very high rate of poor quality seeds, you might need to over collect. It's also a really good way of checking the maturity of the seed. So if you push it together and it's not firm, or it's milky white and soft, it's probably not mature. So maybe you want to come back at a later date. How long left is it? Am I over? Okay, I think I'm there. So collect. So yeah, how to capture genetic diversity. So really, we've touched on this. Try and collect from multiple populations. Again, genetic diversity varies between populations as well as within, and collect multiple times over the collecting season. So again, that's that theme of like there'll be different phenology of the plants and different, and that could be an important trait. Collect seeds from across the site. So yeah, don't just go and, I guess, like the path is this way here, and then we just collect these orange and green trees. We might miss, these have different genetic, it's meant to represent different genes or alleles or whatever. So yeah, if you just collected there, you would miss maybe an important adaptation or trait in part of the woodland. So try to collect from across the woodland. And always a good rule, general rule of thumb, collect from many trees within a site and prioritize fewer seeds from more trees if you can, rather than more seeds from fewer trees. And aim, this is a bit of a tough one. I didn't want to put a number here, but aim for at least 15 trees per woodland. Again, not always possible. Might not be that many trees. That was our advice. But we're also making multiple collections, I guess, in different seed zones. So there's a bit of a different aim. Looking at the community tree nursery advice, I think there's variation between 20 and 50 for an area, 20 or 50 trees for an area. So yeah, just don't collect from like one or two, I guess. And yeah, also think about the different habitats that your trees live in your area. You know, might live in a lowland, might also live the same species at the top of a mountain. Possibly different adaptations between those populations as well. So you want to maybe think about elevation or different soil types and habitats. Final points, leave some for nature, and we all love nature, don't we, and woodlands. So yeah, leave some, never collect over 20% of the seed available. If your timing's wrong, just make a note and come back next year. Easier said than done. Record data, just record anything interesting. You never know when it's going to come into use. And aftercare, so I'm stopping there because I'm assuming that people will be planting or storing for a very short time. But some of these principles are probably still useful about how to store collections. Okay, summary if anyone's interested. And then, yeah, thank you. I think that's it.
I think we best will